the lowest point for us of covering this professionally was when we thought we weren't going to get in there the day after, the hours after the storm. We were pulled over to a back road in Weewahitchka. We had no idea where we were. We were exhausted. We were stressed, and we felt like we were not delivering. This is our job, is to tell whatever we can about this story, and we can't tell it if we can't get there.
We emerged into Port St. Joe to document the remaining amount of landfall because that's where our hotel was. So we were able to kind of get a bird in hand, so to speak, because the paper needed to have some live images. And so we made an agreement that this was the best thing for us to do right now, not to push too far out of the area of the hotel, right? So that we would have, something in hand before we made the push to the landfall zone.
Yeah, we left the hotel around 2. We had still had cell service at that point, and so we had been able to follow the radar images that Hurricane Michael was hitting right about between Tyndall Air Force Base and Mexico Beach. And because of the physics of that storm and the meteorology behind it, we were well aware that the right side of the eye wall, which would be passing over Mexico Beach, would be the biggest issue. And so before we left the hotel, we called back to the office and said, we're leaving, and our goal is to reach Mexico Beach. We got a sort of, okay, go ahead, but there was some fear about whether the back end of the storm would be fierce. So we went out, we turned out of the hotel, and immediately the road was bad. It was flooded. We couldn't get down 98 into downtown Port St. Joe. Doug got out and made a few images. We saw a pine tree fall down feet from another news vehicle, which was problematic to us for obvious reasons. And so we knew we were not going that way, so we started circling through some back routes, got into downtown Port St. Joe, documented that. There was heavy damage, there was storm surge flooding, there were boats in the parking lot of the marina, buildings that were blown apart, in at least holes in them in downtown Port St. Joe. And after probably an hour or two, decided, okay, we were going to continue to move forward to Mexico Beach. And that's, late afternoon, we still have some daylight. We started driving up 71 towards the northwest, towards Weewahitchka. And we thought that we could get to Weewahitchka and then take, possibly, 386 down through Overstreet into Mexico Beach. The reason we were taking a circuitous route was that it was flooded. 98 was flooded out of downtown Port St. Joe towards Mexico Beach. So as we went up that way, there was a lot of tree damage. There was a bulldozer, some deputies who were kind of guarding the way as you were going up 71, but we eventually made it to Weewahitchka. It was around nightfall. 386 was blocked, and so we stopped in Weewahitchka and we decided we had some crunch time here. What were we going to do? We came back down the way we had come. We came back down 71, returning to where we had been, and Doug had heard from a deputy that there was a road, industrial road, which might cut off the flooding. You could take it off of 71 and you could kind of cut out that flooding and get to 98, and then it would drop you right at the nose of the bridge that would take you over into the rest of Port St. Joe and into Mexico Beach. And so we did. We pulled down that road. We had missed it the first time, but we pulled down that road later at night. And my instinct, immediately upon taking the right onto that road, was we're not getting through this, because it was kind of just a wall of trees that had been fallen. But Doug is persistent, and so I trust him, and we're both pretty aggressive in trying to get into the area. And so he said, just pull up to the tree. So we pulled up, and we don't know how it happened. It seems like it was man-made. We don't know what tools would have been used, but there was, a path sort of carved like a zigzag through these trees. It was about, 4 miles, and stretches would have no trees down, but most of it had trees down, and you were driving almost through a canyon that had been cut into the trees.
Somebody had made a decision that it was really important to get through there, and they made a really good path. We had a four-wheel drive vehicle, and so we felt like it was a good calculated risk. You know, it wasn't the best path, it wasn't the most clear path, but somebody had been through there, so it was logical for us to try to push on, and it paid off.
Yeah, we were planning to we got onto 98 and we were planning to just drive into the washout to essentially rule out 98 as a path into Mexico Beach. We would prefer to do that night, go back to our hotel, sleep, and then know we have to come back in through the north the next morning than to continue to have uncertainty around it. So we just kept driving and driving and driving, and the washout never came. The road was washed out, and portions of it, you know, the lane that would kind of take you southeast would be missing big chunks. So we were going slow, so we didn't go into it. But the right lane, the lane that would take us into Mexico Beach, it stayed pretty solid, and it was a slow path in, largely because we kept stopping. We didn't know if we were there yet. We hadn't seen the Mexico Beach sign, the city limit, but we also didn't know if that existed anymore. You know, as we were up in Weehawken, we kept asking deputies, you know, 2 or 3 of them, how do we get to Mexico Beach? And I know 2 of them said essentially the same thing to us, which was as far as they knew, it no longer existed. But, you know, we had to get there, and so we kept stopping, and there's these neighborhoods there, Highland View and Beacon Hill, where we were stopping, and the devastation there was already intense. Just splintered homes, cars thrown everywhere, the remnants of, you know, the Gulf coming ashore. There was clumps of seagrass in the road, and so we would stop. And there's not much I can do as the writer in that situation because there's no people. I can gather scene, which I was doing for a feed. I can describe it. But after a hurricane, everybody wants to see pictures. And so we've worked hurricanes before, and the goal immediately after a landfall for me is to get Doug into a position that he can make the images that tell people what happened in the storm. And this was challenging because it was nighttime, so it was wicked dark. And what we were doing is, from past storms, we had learned we needed a better flashlight. I had bought a pretty intense flashlight from Walmart. It was like $21, but very powerful. And we had the headlights on the vehicle, so we would pull up to a scene and we would say, "Wow, this is crazy! I can't believe we're looking at this." You know, a pickup truck that's slammed into a row of apartments, and you can see each of the living rooms because it's staggered. You can see each of the brightly covered living rooms, and it's like, you know, it's like you're looking into your child's elementary school project, the diorama that they did, but it's somebody's home. And so we would go, and I was driving, and Doug would position me with lights. So that the headlights would shine half of the image, and then either he or I would hold the Walmart flashlight on the other half of the image, and he would take a picture with his phone. And we just kept doing that all the way up. So we kept going on that road, and then we started smelling smoke.
I just remember we were very paranoid of headlights because we had we were pushed into this pretty chaotic zone. So we made an assumption that if either, you know, state or local law enforcement was there, they would see us and they would kick us out. So we kept dodging off the road anytime we saw headlights. And about a mile up the road, I kept thinking these headlights are coming at us, but they're just never coming. It's just like this glow up the road. And all of a sudden, Zach is telling me that he's smelling smoke. So I said, well, let's drive that way. Let's just go check it out. And we kept driving up the road, and the glow was getting a little brighter, a little bit brighter. And then when we got up at the crest of the turn, we looked to the right, and there was a home that was completely on fire, completely involved, burning down to the ground. There was a natural gas line just blowing flames, and there was nobody there. It was just burning by it, you know, it's on its own, unattended. And that to me was really surreal. That just kind of punctuated the blow that town took. And the real surreal experience of that was, on one side you could hear and see the ocean and the waves crashing off in the distance, and then over on the other side you had this house that was completely burning down, and, you know, all the sounds of a fire, and yet just so quiet and breezy. It's just really haunting.
Yeah, and we live in a structured world, so both Doug and I have covered fires before, and you can never walk up to a fire, right? Because everybody is there, all the residents are there looking at it, and all the firefighters are there trying to knock the flames down. But there was nobody. We just walked right up to the fire. You know, we could have walked into it. You know, there was just no regulation whatsoever, and that hit me too in that moment where it wasn't just that it was a ghost town because there was all these signs of life around us. It was just as if, you know, everything had been destroyed, and so there was still sort of the remnants of society were there, and you knew that people were coming back, and you knew that even further deeper in that people were there because people had ridden out the storm. But nobody was there to take care of the place, basically. No firefighters, no law enforcement. It was just left to its own, you know, kind of misery in that moment. So at that point, we knew we had a lot of stuff, and we knew that people should know about this. The entire point of what we're doing as journalists who are covering the hurricane in those hours after landfall is everybody in Florida, all the evacuees of that area and the panhandle, people really across the country, because we have a fascination with storms, want to know what happened in this place. And the best way to do that is for us to go in there, take some pictures, make some scenes, describe it, and get it out and make sure that people understand it. That's what our goal is to share with people what's happening. And before we had lost cell service, we were both getting a lot of messages through Twitter and through email and even by phone from people saying, can you go check this address? Can you go check this address? I'm worried about my brother, or I'm worried about my sister, my mother, my father. Can you go? And in most cases, we couldn't even see those until days later. And in, you know, actuality, the storm dictated where we went. You know, we could only go where the damage sort of allowed us.
We got flagged down by a young couple that they had a flashlight and they flashed us down. We were the only car there, and they said that they had the woman's mother. It was a woman's mother was having a breathing problem, and that she had a machine that would help her breathe. I guess a breathing treatment. And they were trying to find a vehicle that they could plug a lighter machine into. We picked them up, and we drove probably 6 different ways. We tried to get back into the neighborhood to get to their mother, but we didn't have any luck because trees, power lines, just debris. It was just too massive, and that was hard.
That was
We really
difficult.
wanted to help her, but
That was difficult. We did see the guy the next day, and he said that she was able to get through and she got some help, but that was bad. And then we were left with the decision of, we have all this important stuff. Do we go back to the bridge where there's cell service and file it, risking running into law enforcement along the way who may tell us, hey, you ain't getting back in there? Or do we stay there overnight, knowing that the story that we've already been assigned to do is to talk to people and to get a full bit of news package, you know, a full news package by, you know, 3 p.m. or whatever the next day, whatever time we could. So the calculation there is this good enough where we need to get it out right now, or do we hold on to this and make sure we stay here and then get a full story? And at that point, neither Doug nor I thought that we were the first, you know, wave of news coverage in that area. So, but we decided that the images were powerful. What we had seen really affected both of us, and so we went back to the bridge. We risked it and went back to the bridge, knowing that we may never not get back in there for 3 or 4 days. But we ran into no one, and we sat atop the bridge for maybe 20 minutes, about 1 a.m., and we filed, I think I probably filed maybe 6 to 10 tweets, and you filed probably 4 or 5 photo galleries. I texted an editor, I said, hey, check it out. And then we turned and we went back into Mexico Beach and decided to sleep there that night.
we decided for the best outcome in the morning that if we had our truck in there and that we were fresh in the morning, fresh eyes at daybreak, without having to navigate any roadblocks or law enforcement or anything, it would be in the best interest of getting the story if we just would find a safe place to sleep. So we scouted properties that we felt were real visual, that when we woke up there might be a story there, and we had found in was this Port St. Joe? It was still Port
It
St.
was
Joe.
still Port St. Joe.
Yeah, a beachfront home that had a rental property on it, and 3 vehicles were. It just looked like a tossed salad of vehicles and building materials. I mean, it was just crazy. There were 2 red Miatas and a white pickup truck, and we decided this was really visual. It was really closer to the bridge. We weren't going to have to go, too far back into the zone. It was a good, safe decision. So we pulled up on the side of the hill, parked our vehicle there, and said goodnight. Went to sleep.
And then we spent the next day in Mexico Beach, left, filed another story, returned the next day, spent that day in Mexico Beach, and then left, for good. I think though both of us probably hope that we'll be back at some point to continue to cover this, and part of that is in the daylight, the damage and the devastation was even more extensive, certainly than I won't speak for Doug, but certainly than I had been able to imagine at night. And we had not gotten into sort of the northwestern portion of the city, which is where some of the worst destruction was. And we saw that over the course of the next 2 days, and it's hard to describe. I was just recently looking on Google Maps at what Mexico Beach looked like before, and to match those two things up is really difficult. The density that existed before versus the sort of valleys of destruction that are there now, that there's just nothing. You just can't see where the properties begin or end. You can barely see the roads in those couple days after. And we were able to meet with some residents who were struggling, but who were universally very patient and kind with us, despite the fact that we were kind of there to observe what is for many of them the worst part, the worst moments of their lives.
This is the room that I had my mom and dad in, and I had them on the mattress floating they were all the way up to the top of the ceiling, and my dad was all the way up here, and we brought my dad on the door, and I don't know where the door went, it's gone, but we floated my dad off with that door out here into this, where the ramp is going back into the other side of the house. And water was gushing in. I was underwater and pushing my mom and dad back out into the other part of the house. And this water was just gushing in here. And it was something else. I don't know how we were alive today. And some of this debris in here is not even my mom and dad's stuff. I don't even know where it come from.
What made you decide as the family to stay here instead of up there?
Up there?
Yeah.
Because my dad was handicapped, and we had this handicapped airbed back there. Okay. And that's why we stayed. But then I finally, for some reason, we moved him out here, and it's a blessing because all the debris is back there. Here on the corner of the house, knocked that part of the corner out, window out, and it ended up over here in the yard.
That was with the water?
That was at the RV campground.
The pictures, I think, speak for themselves there, and the stories. I don't think we can say anything that the residents couldn't say themselves. Right before we left, we turned down the street that we hadn't been down, closer to the water, and Doug was especially adamant about doing this because he felt like we needed to kind of get some closure to see everywhere that we could. And that was the most shocking thing walking through there. Somebody had taken an American flag, and they had taken that American flag and they had anchored it to this piece of fence that was standing in an area that was completely ruined. And that was kind of a powerful image. They had anchored it with 2 sandbags. And so it made both of us stop, and we parked the vehicle and we started walking. And we were walking through what was apparently ostensibly a row of townhomes at one point. And we looked down, and we were on a perfectly intact tile floor. And that's something that keeps kind of running through my head, is we were in somebody's kitchen, and you could see it because there were unbroken bottles of beer, and there was unbroken jars of salsa, and a coffee mug that was still in okay shape. And that's like something that's definitely stuck with me, is it just was a very strange feeling, and it really gave me some context for just how awful this had been. and how people had been here before.
Yeah, dozens of toilets just cracked off at the base, bathtubs, washing machines, clothes dryers, flat screen televisions. I mean, just like somebody had taken, a dozen Walmarts and ground them up and threw them in all directions. It was just amazing. Every single consumer good you can imagine just in this massive, nondescript pile.
And then we drive out, and both of us were talking about it as we did it and kind of thinking of it, and it doesn't feel great because, I'm personally very grateful and I'm thankful that we are able to drive out and that it's not our houses that are destroyed, because we can come back, you have a family, and we can come back and be okay. But you feel a little guilty, I think. Like I personally feel, there's a little bit of shame that you feel, because the story is not going to stop. We had our assignment to be on the front end of the storm, but it's only getting worse. We're a week out now, and those residents haven't had really a consistent water supply or consistent food supply, and it's just a horrible situation. And you're very grateful to be able to drive away from it, but I think both of us, and I think anybody who's been in there, is cognizant of the privilege that is. And I think that's part of why both of us hope that we can go back and keep telling the story. I mean, there's people this is going to be months, if this is going to be years, that this is going to take. And we were maybe there in the first 2 days, but there's a lot more happening.